Just for one moment, I want you to think back to your childhood. What did you want to do when you grew up? At the tender age of 5, I knew exactly what I wanted to be. While my kindergarten classmates were aspiring to be firefighters and astronauts and the next president of the United States, in my bones, I knew that I was going to be a teacher and a mother. In 2011, I married my long-term partner, John, and I became the stepmother to a beautiful and brilliant girl named Lexi. That same year, I joined the faculty at Bowling Green State University, and my dream of becoming a teacher became a reality. And each day, I thank my lucky stars that I get to work with brilliant undergraduates and graduate students, as well as have fabulous faculty and staff colleagues. That said, John, Lexi, and I dared to dream just a little bit more. You see, we wanted to add one more family member to our mix. We wanted to become a family of 4. In 2015, John, Lexi, and I were ecstatic when we found out that I was pregnant. We began to brainstorm baby names, we started to plan the nursery, and we started to count down the days when we would get to hold baby Spud, that was her nickname, we would get to hold baby Spud in our arms and see her coo and see her smile. I experienced all of the typical symptoms that you would experience in the first pregnancy trimester. I had the swollen ankles, I had the fatigue, I had the morning sickness, which quite frankly doesn't just happen in the morning, it's an all-day kind of affair. But it was all worth it when at 7 weeks, we got to hear baby Spud's heartbeat and see her squirm and wiggle and dance on the sonogram screen. It was amazing, it was magical, and we were smitten. Unfortunately, that was the first and last time we got to meet baby Spud. At 12 weeks of pregnancy, I returned to the OBGYN's office for what was supposed to be a routine examination. However, in taking a look at my body, the healthcare provider said that she couldn't quite hear a heartbeat. So she sent me back to the sonogram technician for some additional screening. And within 1 minute of waving that wand around, the technician's face grew very stern and she said, "We've lost the baby." And I thought there must have been a mistake. Maybe the baby was hiding. So I said, no, maybe look one more time. Maybe the baby has squirmed and wiggled. Maybe she's on the other side of the womb. I had no idea. And the technician didn't look. Her face fell, and she said, "No, I'm so sorry, Lisa. You've had a miscarriage. We've lost the baby." And at that moment, my world turned black. I later learned that I had experienced a silent or missed miscarriage. This is when the fetus fails to thrive, but the body tricks itself for some reason into thinking that it's still pregnant. Baby Spud had died in my womb around 9 or 10 weeks of pregnancy, and I was absolutely oblivious to it. And given my particular situation, instead of having the miscarriage being taken care of in 1 day, my healthcare provider told me that I should miscarry naturally, and so it ended up taking another 3.5 weeks until that process was over. It was horrible, it was traumatic. I was angry, I was sad, I was scared. I felt betrayed by my body for failing to do something that has supposedly been biologically determined to do. It was awful. But then something amazing happened. I started to talk to friends and family in my support network, and I discovered something. Family, coworkers, neighbors, colleagues, they started to disclose to me that they too had experienced pregnancy loss. And to quote Alison Folkman, it was like there was a whole community or a secret society of people who had been affected by pregnancy loss, and we were all suffering in silence. And that was my aha moment. I was not alone, and we were not alone. The American Pregnancy Association estimates that approximately 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage, which means that each year millions and millions of people are affected by pregnancy loss, and many of which are suffering in silence. The year is 2018, and 2 questions keep me up at night. Why is there still a stigma around pregnancy loss and miscarriage? And furthermore, what can we do to shatter the silence? In this talk today, I hope to answer both of those particular questions, and in doing so, I hope to build a stronger community of care and to build some affinity and empathy toward the women and their partners and their loved ones who need it most. First, I'll talk about 3 things that help to perpetuate that silence around pregnancy loss, and then second, I'll share some ideas of things that we can do today to make a difference. To begin, Why the silence? First, media misrepresentations. Historically, mainstream media has grossly underestimated stories of pregnancy loss. Typically what happens is we've got a heterosexual, typically white, young woman who is pregnant, she has a miscarriage, she grieves intensely, and then she's fine. And this all happens within the course of a 30 to 60-minute episode, right? It's very, very quick. For example, Sex and the City's character Charlotte, she experiences a miscarriage, she grieves, she binge watches some documentary about Elizabeth Taylor, and then she rejoins society, emerging strong, and she hangs out with her friends at the end of just a 30-minute spiel. And another example is Pixar's beloved movie Up. In the first 5 minutes of the movie, there's a beautiful montage where we get to learn about the love story of Carl and Ellie Fredrickson. And throughout that 5-minute montage, they meet, they fall in love, and they grow old together. And if you pay attention really closely, you'll notice in the middle, Ellie does experience a traumatic pregnancy loss. And it does affect their relationship a little bit. But that's all that's mentioned is in that very beginning of the movie, and the rest of it is dedicated toward them going on to do greater and bigger things. To really challenge and shatter the stereotype and the silence about miscarriage and pregnancy loss, we need more representations, multidimensional ones that feature diverse people with diverse contexts and diverse stories. We can do better. In addition to media misrepresentations, there's also what I'm calling the attributional paradox. When women experience pregnancy loss, a lot of times they ask the question, why? Why me? Why now? Why did this happen? And many times the answers are insufficient and they are anything but satisfying. I recently finished conducting a study of 25 in-depth interviews with women ages 18 all the way to 74 who had experienced at least one miscarriage during their life. And in talking with them and listening to their stories, many of them experienced what I call the attributional paradox. They tried to find reasons for why they had their miscarriage, and unfortunately, there were not very good answers to be found. On the one hand, many times there's no answer at all. There's no medical explanation, no accident, nothing. And so while at first blush this seems really comforting because there's no one to blame, it can be absolutely terrifying moving forward when one gets pregnant. Because if you don't know why it didn't happen, how can you prevent it? But then on the other hand, for those who did find out that there was a specific medical illness, an accident, or some sort of external event that happened, for these women, they often turn inwards. And they felt feelings of shame and guilt, and it spiraled around, and it was not very, very helpful. So this attributional paradox really does help to sustain that silence. The final reason for, and before I get started, I also wanted to talk briefly about some of my research participants. One of my participants, Iris, captured this really, really greatly. She said, so if I want to get pregnant again, how can I prevent that? If there's no specific causal thing that we can control, then it becomes frightening moving forward. And then on the other hand, Chandra, she said, we had DNA tests, nothing was wrong. We had blood tests, nothing was wrong. However, no one told me until recently that I had a fibroid, and that could cause miscarriages. And she later went on to blame herself for those particular incidents. So moving on, the final reason why there might be some silence around miscarriage and pregnancy loss is what I'm calling the paradox of seeking support. There's a wealth of scholarship, including this done by Brent Burleson as well as Riff and Singer, that demonstrates that seeking support can help people cope with a variety of stressors. But unfortunately, the literature on pregnancy loss and support indicates that, unfortunately, when people try to seek support with these issues, that they receive anything but helpful messages. In my personal experience, there were 3 different types of messages of support that weren't very helpful. And they were all very well-intentioned, but they did not land the mark. First were these messages of well-intentioned but really hurtful emotional support. So people would say the at least. The, well, at least you could get pregnant. Or the at least you weren't further along in that pregnancy. These were not very helpful. On the other hand, I also experienced messages where people would try to give advice, unsolicited and oftentimes unhelpful. So things like the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Maybe you shouldn't have waited so long to get pregnant. Not very helpful. Or maybe you shouldn't have had that cup of decaf coffee. And then finally, I received some messages that were just clearly just off the mark. Messages such as, well, it's been a month. Just get over it. Or you just need to move on with your life. These were not helpful, and I think it demonstrates why people may not be willing to share their story. So given all of these particular issues, what can we do to change this issue? What can we do to shatter the silence? To begin, I think that we as a community can provide better support. So instead of saying something like, I know exactly how you feel, we can say, it's good to see you. How are you doing? How are you doing? Let's go grab lunch and talk. Or perhaps at least you can still get pregnant. Instead of saying the at least, move into the I am so sorry, I am here to listen. Or perhaps instead of saying everything happens for a reason and thinking about that attributional paradox, perhaps we can say it's not your fault. What can we do to help? The point here is that what we need to do is to provide a safe, non-judgmental space for women and their loved ones to grieve, to actively listen, and to provide messages of affirmation and affinity and care. That's what we really need. Furthermore, what I would also encourage you to do, if you have a story to share, is to speak up and to break that silence yourself. I've always wanted to be able to say this. I think that we should be more like Beyonce. We should be like Beyonce. We should be like Nicole Kidman, even Mariah Carey, women and their loved ones who have spoken out and said that, yes, pregnancy loss is a big issue that affects our society, and this is affecting me, and it affects us. Here's my story. So I would encourage you, if you have the courage and if you feel safe, to break that silence. I think together we can shift the norms. For me, I know, looking back, that my experience with miscarriage was a defining moment, but it is not the only thing that defines me. And even in 2015, when I thought, oh, my story is over when we lost baby Spud, time went on and my story went on. I'm so thrilled to tell you that after 9.5 months of incubating and after 36 hours of labor, John, Lexi, and I were thrilled to welcome in on March 15th, 2017, baby Sean, Hanasono Dowd. And we got to hold him in our arms. We got to hear him coo. We got to see him smile. And we are finally a family of 4. Now, while we celebrate baby Sean and we love our family, I do recognize that not every woman who has a pregnancy loss will go on to have a baby, and that is perfectly fine. It's about finding the value and the validity and the courage in each and every person's story. So looking back, I ask you one more time, what did you want to be when you grew up? I stand before you, I think that I've grown up. I think that I'm a grown-up-ish at this particular point. But that said, my dream continues. And I hope in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 40 or 50 years, if I'm so lucky, that my new dream is to work diligently and tirelessly to shatter the silence on pregnancy loss and miscarriage. And I invite you to join that journey with me. What can you do? We can provide better support. What can we do? We can share our own story. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you.